Ruby Keating's heart hammered in her chest as she raced down the muddy main street of Yankton, Dakota Territory, her skirts clutched in white-knuckled fists. The spring rain of 1876 had turned the ground treacherous, but she'd rather risk the mud than what waited behind her at the Silver Dollar Saloon. The sound of cruel laughter chased her, as bitter as the taste of fear on her tongue. Look at her run. Sheriff Donovan's drunken voice boomed from the saloon porch. Like a scared rabbit, Ruby didn't dare look back. She'd been a fool to think she could earn an honest wage serving drinks in a town like Yankton. 6 months had taught her the truth: a woman alone was nothing but prey to men like Donovan and his deputies. "She's running to me." The voice came from ahead, low and steady. Ruby stumbled to a halt, her path blocked by a tall figure standing in the shadows beside the general store. The stranger stepped into the light, and she found herself facing a man she'd never seen before. He wore trail-worn clothes and a dusty hat, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, steady and clear in a sun-weathered face. "Grant Evans," he said simply, tipping his hat. "And I believe those men are causing you trouble." Before Ruby could respond, the sheriff and his 3 deputies came stumbling down the boardwalk. "That's far enough," Grant called out, his posture relaxed but his hand resting near the revolver at his hip. "The lady doesn't seem to appreciate your company," Sheriff Donovan scowled. "This ain't your concern, stranger. The girl works for me." "I quit," Ruby said, finding her voice at last. "I told you that before I walked out." Grant's expression never changed, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Seems clear enough to me. The lady's employment has ended." Donovan took a step forward, but one of his deputies grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. The sheriff's bleary eyes narrowed as he took a closer look at Grant. "You're that gunslinger from Kansas," he said, his voice suddenly more sober. "The one they call the judge." Grant didn't confirm or deny it, but Ruby felt him tense beside her. Whatever reputation this man carried, it was enough to make Donovan reconsider. "Keep the girl then," the sheriff spat, backing away. "But this is my town, Evans. Don't forget that." When they were alone, Ruby exhaled shakily. "Thank you, Mr. Evans, but I don't need your protection." "Never said you did." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "But everyone needs a friend in a place like this." Ruby studied him warily. "And that's what you're offering, friendship." "For now," he answered, and the simple honesty in his voice made her heart skip a beat. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" The question brought reality crashing back. Ruby had been living in a small room above the saloon, a room she could no longer return to. "I'll manage." Grant nodded toward the end of the street. "There's a widow named Mrs. Patterson who runs a boarding house on Pine Street. Tell her Grant Evans sent you. She'll give you a fair rate." Ruby hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" His expression grew distant. "Let's just say I've seen too many people with no one to turn to." He tipped his hat again. "Good night, Miss Keating," she supplied. "Ruby Keating." "Miss Keating," he acknowledged. "Perhaps our paths will cross again." As he walked away, Ruby couldn't help but wonder about the man who had appeared just when she needed someone most. The judge, they'd called him. A gunslinger with a reputation fearsome enough to make the corrupt sheriff of Yankton back down. She should be terrified of such a man. Instead, she found herself hoping that their paths would indeed cross again. Dawn broke over the Dakota prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Ruby sat on the small porch of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the town slowly come to life. The widow had been kind, offering her a clean room and even lending her a nightgown when Ruby arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back. "You're up early, Miss Keating," Mrs. Patterson said, joining her on the porch. The older woman was already dressed for the day, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a cap. "Old habits," Ruby replied. The saloon didn't open until noon, but Mr. Thorson wanted the floors scrubbed and tables cleaned before then. Mrs. Patterson's lips thinned at the mention of the saloon owner. "Thorson's no better than Donovan. 2 peas in a rotten pod, if you ask me." Ruby nodded, her thoughts turning to more pressing matters. "I need to find work, Mrs. Patterson. I have enough saved to pay for a week's lodging, but after that." "What skills do you have, child?" Ruby considered the question. "I can read and write well enough. I kept the books at my father's store before he passed. I can sew a straight seam, though nothing fancy, and I've served my share of drinks, though I'd prefer not to do that again." Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "The mercantile might be hiring." "Mr. Wilson's daughter just got married and moved to Sioux Falls." She paused, studying Ruby. "Though you might want to lie low for a day or two, Donovan has a mean streak when his pride's been wounded." The reminder of the previous night's confrontation sent a chill down Ruby's spine. "Do you know anything about the man who helped me? Grant Evans?" Something flickered across Mrs. Patterson's face, concern, perhaps, or wariness. "He's been in town about a week, keeps to himself mostly, takes his meals at the hotel restaurant and spends his days." She hesitated. "Well, watching." "Watching what? The bank, the sheriff's office, the saloon?" Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "Men like that usually have a purpose, and it rarely brings peace to a town." Before Ruby could ask more questions, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention to the street. A rider approached, his horse's coat gleaming in the morning light. Ruby's breath caught as she recognized Grant Evans, looking as composed in the daylight as he had in the shadows. He reined his horse to a stop in front of the boarding house. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," he called. "Miss Keating, Mr. Evans," the widow acknowledged with a nod that was polite but cool. His eyes settled on Ruby. "I was hoping to have a word with Miss Keating, if she's willing." Mrs. Patterson frowned, but Ruby stood, smoothing her skirts. "It's all right, Mrs. Patterson. Mr. Evans did me a great service last night." The older woman didn't look convinced, but retreated into the house with a meaningful glance at Ruby that clearly said, "Be careful." Ruby approached the fence separating the small yard from the street. Grant remained mounted, perhaps deliberately keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to make sure you found safe lodging," he said. "I did, thank you." Ruby tilted her head, studying him. In the daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 to her 22 years, and there was a weathered quality to him that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "Mrs. Patterson seems to think you're trouble, Mr. Evans." A slight smile touched his lips. "Mrs. Patterson is a good judge of character." The frank admission surprised her. "Are you trouble, I mean, for some?" His gaze held her steadily. "Not for you, Miss Keating." Ruby wasn't sure why she believed him, but she did. "The sheriff called you a gunslinger. The judge," he said. Grant's expression hardened. "Names like that follow a man whether he wants them to or not." "Is that why you're in Yankton, your reputation?" He glanced down the street toward the sheriff's office. "I'm here because sometimes the law fails, and people need protection from those who are supposed to protect them." The words sent a chill through Ruby. "You're talking about Sheriff Donovan, among others." Grant's attention returned to her. "Miss Keating, I'd advise you to stay clear of the saloon and the sheriff's office for the next few days. Things might get complicated." Ruby straightened her spine. "Mr. Evans, I appreciate your concern, but I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. I need work, and I can't hide away because the sheriff has a grudge." Grant studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "The telegraph office is looking for someone who can send and receive messages. The operator, Mr. Hayes, mentioned it yesterday. Can you work a telegraph key?" Ruby's heart leaped. "No, but I'm a quick learner." "He opens at 9. Grant reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "Give him this. It's a letter of introduction from an old friend of his." Ruby took the paper hesitantly. "Why would you do this for me?" His expression softened slightly. "Perhaps I have my own reasons for wanting to see Sheriff Donovan's influence diminished in this town. Having someone he's threatened find honest work with a respectable businessman would be a start." Before Ruby could respond, Grant tipped his hat. "Good day, Miss Keating. I hope the position suits you." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Ruby standing with the note in her hand and more questions than answers. The telegraph office was a small but tidy establishment on the corner of Yankton's Main Street. Ruby smoothed her borrowed dress, another kindness from Mrs. Patterson, and gathered her courage before pushing open the door. Mr. Hayes proved to be a man of about 60 with spectacles perched on his nose and an air of perpetual busyness. He glanced up as she entered, his expression distracted. "Yes, can I help you, miss?" Ruby handed him Grant's note. Mr. Evans suggested I inquire about the operator position. Hayes's eyebrows rose as he read the letter. You know Ethan Mitchell, he asked, referring to the name signed at the bottom. Ruby hesitated only briefly. Only through Mr. Evans. Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. Evans has been watching the town, I've noticed. Man like that doesn't make recommendations lightly. He gestured to the telegraph key. Ever used one of these? No, sir, but I'm willing to learn. To her surprise, Hayes smiled. Good, most young men come in thinking they already know everything. He pulled out a chair. Sit, I'll show you the basics. If you can pick it up by noon, the job is yours. Ruby worked diligently all morning, her fingers growing more confident on the key as Hayes patiently corrected her technique. By midday, she could send and receive simple messages, though she was far from proficient. You're a natural, Hayes declared, clearly pleased. Come back tomorrow at 8 and we'll make it official. Pays not much, but it's honest work. Ruby left the telegraph office with her heart lighter than it had been in months. Having a respectable job would change everything. She could save money, perhaps even rent a small place of her own eventually. Her newfound optimism dimmed as she rounded the corner and nearly collided with Sheriff Donovan. Well, well, he drawled, his bloodshot eyes narrowing, if it isn't the runaway barmaid. Ruby stepped back, keenly aware they were alone on this side street. Excuse me, Sheriff, I need to pass. He blocked her path, alcohol fumes wafting from his breath despite the early hour. Not so fast, I've been thinking about last night. Your friend embarrassed me in front of the whole town. He merely pointed out that I'd quit my position, Ruby said, trying to keep her voice steady. Nothing to be embarrassed about. Donovan's hand shot out, gripping her arm painfully. You think you're clever, don't you, getting that gunslinger to fight your battles? But Evans won't be around forever, and this is still my town. Ruby tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go of me. I don't think I will. His other hand reached for her waist. Maybe I need to remind you how things work in Yankton. Panic rose in Ruby's throat, but before she could scream, the distinct sound of a revolver being cocked broke the silence. I wouldn't, Grant's voice came from behind Donovan, cold as steel. Not unless you're prepared to die over it. The sheriff froze, his face flushing with rage. You're making a mistake, Evans. You can't kill a lawman and walk away. I can if it's self-defense, Grant replied evenly, or in defense of another. Now take your hands off Miss Keating. Donovan released her with a shove that sent her stumbling back. This isn't over, he growled, but he backed away, hands raised. For today it is, Grant said, his revolver still trained on the sheriff. Walk away. When Donovan was out of sight, Grant holstered his weapon and turned to Ruby. Are you hurt? She rubbed her arm where the sheriff's fingers had dug in. No, just shaken. She looked up at Grant, questions swimming in her eyes. How did you know? I've been keeping an eye on Donovan when I saw him follow you around the corner. He shrugged, seemed prudent to follow. Ruby studied him, wondering again about this man who seemed to appear whenever she needed help. Mr. Hayes offered me the position, she said, changing the subject. I start tomorrow. Grant smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. Good, that'll give you some stability. And protection, Ruby added. Donovan might harass a former barmaid, but he'll think twice about bothering the telegraph operator. Smart thinking. Grant offered her his arm. May I walk you back to Mrs. Patterson's? Ruby hesitated only briefly before accepting. As they walked, she found herself studying his profile. Mr. Evans, why are you really in Yankton? And please don't say it's to protect people from Sheriff Donovan. While that may be true, I suspect there's more to it. Grant was silent for several paces before responding. My brother was killed 6 months ago, shot in the back while riding out of town. His voice was controlled, but Ruby could hear the pain beneath the words. The man who killed him is here in Yankton. Sheriff Donovan? Ruby guessed. Grant shook his head. No, a man named Victor Harlow. He owns the bank now. Ruby's steps faltered. Victor Harlow was one of the most respected men in Yankton, a pillar of the community who had arrived about 4 months ago and quickly established himself as a successful businessman. You're sure it was him? I'm sure. Grant's jaw tightened. My brother was a U.S. Marshal. He was investigating Harlow for fraud and robbery in Kansas City. Harlow shot him before he could make an arrest, then disappeared with a fortune in stolen money. money he's now using to build his respectable new life. Ruby felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring air. "You're going to kill him." Grant stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm going to bring him to justice, the legal way if possible, and if not," his eyes met hers unflinching, "then I'll do what needs to be done." Ruby understood then why they called him the judge. This was a man who believed in justice above all else, even if it had to come from the barrel of a gun. "That's why you're watching the town," she said quietly. "You're gathering evidence?" "Yes." His gaze softened as he looked at her. "Ruby, you should know being seen with me might not be wise if Harlow realizes who I am and why I'm here." "I can take care of myself," she said firmly, echoing her words from earlier that day. "And perhaps I can help." Grant shook his head. "This isn't your fight." "No," Ruby agreed. "But this is my town now, and if Victor Harlow is the man you say he is, then he's as much a threat to Yankton as Sheriff Donovan." Something flickered in Grant's eyes, respect, perhaps, or concern, maybe both. "You're a remarkable woman, Ruby Keating." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "So I've been told, Mr. Evans." "Grant," he corrected. "If we're to be allies, you might as well use my name." Ruby smiled. "Grant, then." She took his arm again, resuming their walk. "Now tell me more about this Victor Harlow and what evidence you need to bring him to justice." The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that brought both purpose and an unexpected happiness to Ruby's life. During the day, she worked at the telegraph office, her skills improving rapidly under Mr. Hayes's tutelage. In the evenings, she helped Grant piece together evidence against Victor Harlow. It was dangerous work, conducted in whispered conversations over coffee at Mrs. Patterson's kitchen table after the widow had gone to bed. Grant brought documents he'd collected, bank records that didn't quite add up, witness statements from Kansas City, newspaper clippings about his brother's murder and Harlow's sudden disappearance. "The problem," Grant explained one evening, spreading the papers before her, "is that I can't prove he's the same man. He's changed his appearance, grew a beard, dyes his hair. And he has Sheriff Donovan in his pocket, so any official inquiry would be shut down before it started." Ruby studied the faded newspaper sketch of Victor Harlow from Kansas City. "The eyes are the same," she murmured, "and the way he holds himself like he owns everything he sees." Grant nodded. "But that's not enough for a judge. I need something solid: banking records, correspondence, anything that ties him to his old identity." Ruby tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. "The telegraph office might help. All messages to and from the bank come through us, if Harlow is communicating with anyone from his past." "That's risky," Grant warned. "If Hayes catches you reading private telegrams, he won't," Ruby assured him. "He takes lunch from noon to 1 every day. I'm alone in the office then." Grant studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. "I never meant to involve you this deeply." Ruby met his gaze steadily. "You didn't involve me. I chose this." She hesitated, then added softly, "Just as I chose to care about what happens to you." The admission hung between them, changing the air in the small kitchen. Grant reached across the table, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. Ruby, the creak of a floorboard upstairs made them both freeze. Grant withdrew his hand as Mrs. Patterson's voice called down, "Ruby, is everything all right?" I heard voices. "Just me, Mrs. Patterson," Ruby called back. "I couldn't sleep and came down for some tea." There was a pause then. "Well, don't stay up too late. You have work in the morning." When they were sure she had returned to bed, Grant began gathering his papers. "I should go. We're both taking enough risks as it is." Ruby walked him to the back door where the darkness would cover his departure. "Tomorrow night?" she asked. He nodded, his eyes lingering on her face. For a moment she thought he might say something more or perhaps even kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand once and slipped away into the night. Ruby watched him go, a strange ache in her chest. Despite the danger they faced, these evening meetings had become precious to her. Grant Evans was unlike any man she had ever known, principled, intelligent, and unfailingly respectful of her as an equal partner in their investigation. She was falling in love with him, she realized with a start. And judging by the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she wouldn't notice, the feeling might be mutual, but love would have to wait. Justice for Grant's brother and safety for the people of Yankton had to come first. The next afternoon, Ruby's patience was rewarded. As the clock struck 12 and Mr. Hayes left for his daily lunch at the hotel restaurant, a telegram arrived for Victor Harlow. Protocol dictated that she deliver it immediately, but Ruby's hands trembled as she decoded the message instead. Coming to Yankton stop business opportunity requires attention stop arrive Friday train stop. Regards Jenkins. The name Jenkins meant nothing to her, but the timing was suspicious. Friday was just 2 days away. Ruby quickly copied the message, tucked the copy into her boot, and delivered the original to the bank as if nothing were amiss. Victor Harlow accepted the telegram with a polite nod, his expression betraying nothing as he read it. "No reply necessary, Miss Keating," he said, already turning back to his ledgers. Ruby left the bank with her heart pounding. That evening, when she showed the message to Grant, his face hardened. "Jenkins is Harlow's former business partner," he explained. "They worked together in Kansas City. If he's coming here," he shook his head, "this could be the break we need. Jenkins might bring documents, evidence that could link Harlow to his past. Or he could warn Harlow that you're here," Ruby pointed out. "If he recognizes you, he won't," Grant said grimly. "I've never met Jenkins." "But you're right, this complicates things." He paced the small kitchen, thinking, "I need to be at that train station on Friday, but so will Harlow, most likely." Ruby had a sudden idea. What if we created a distraction, something that would keep Harlow occupied while you approach Jenkins? Grant considered this. It would have to be something significant. Harlow doesn't leave the bank for just anything. "What about a fire?" Ruby suggested. "Not a real one, of course, but if someone reported a fire at the bank." "While I'm at the train station," Grant finished, nodding slowly. "It could work, but who would make the report? It can't be you. You'll be at the telegraph office." Ruby thought for a moment. "Mrs. Patterson might help. She's no friend of Donovan or Harlow." Grant looked dubious. "That's asking a lot of her." "Let me talk to her," Ruby said. "She's been more supportive than you know." The next morning, Ruby took a deep breath and approached Mrs. Patterson as the older woman prepared breakfast. "Mrs. Patterson, there's something I need to tell you about Mr. Evans and why he's in Yankton." The widow looked unsurprised. "I figured there was more to his visits than just calling on you, though that's part of it too, I'd wager." Ruby blushed but pressed on, explaining about Harlow, Grant's brother, and their plan for Friday. To her surprise, Mrs. Patterson listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly determined. "So you see," Ruby finished, "we need someone to create a distraction, someone who can report a fire at the bank while Grant intercepts Mr. Jenkins at the train station." Mrs. Patterson wiped her hands on her apron, a gleam in her eye that made her look years younger. "I'll do better than that," she said. "My late husband was on the town council for 20 years. I still take tea with their wives every Tuesday. By Friday, half the town will have heard rumors about questionable goings-on at Harlow's bank." Ruby stared at her in astonishment. "You do that?" The older woman's expression hardened. "My herald always said a town is only as good as the men who run it. Yankton deserved better than Donovan, and it sounds like it deserves better than Harlow too." She patted Ruby's hand. "You tell Mr. Evans I'll have his distraction. He'd just be ready to do his part." Friday dawned clear and cool. Ruby went to work as usual, trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. The morning passed in a blur of telegrams and customers, none of whom could guess at the tension coiled within her. At precisely 11:45, Mrs. Patterson entered the telegraph office, her expression serene but her eyes alight with purpose. She handed Ruby a telegram to send an innocuous message to her niece in Sioux Falls and whispered, "It's done. The Ladies' Aid Society is in an uproar over rumors that Harlow's been mishandling church funds. They're gathering at the bank at noon to demand answers." Ruby squeezed the older woman's hand gratefully. "Thank you." Mrs. Patterson nodded once and left as quietly as she had come. 15 minutes later, Ruby watched through the office window as a group of Yankton's most formidable matrons marched toward the bank, their faces set with righteous indignation. The noon train whistled in the distance, right on schedule. Grant stood on the train platform, his hat pulled low over his eyes as he scanned the passengers disembarking from the Chicago and Northwestern. He spotted Jenkins immediately, a portly man in an expensive suit, carrying a leather satchel and looking nervously around the station. As planned, there was no sign of Harlow. The commotion at the bank had worked. Grant approached casually, adopting the manner of a helpful local. "Mr. Jenkins, the porter mentioned you were looking for transportation to the bank." Jenkins looked relieved. "Yes, thank you. I'm meeting Mr. Harlow, but I'm not familiar with the town." "I'd be happy to show you the way," Grant offered. "Though I should mention there seems to be some sort of disturbance at the bank right now. Perhaps you'd like to wait at the hotel until it clears up." Jenkins frowned. "Disturbance? What kind of disturbance?" "Something about financial irregularities," Grant said vaguely. "The local ladies' society has quite a few questions for Mr. Harlow." The banker's face paled. "Perhaps the hotel would be best, yes." Grant led him to the Dakota House, Yankton's finest establishment, and suggested they have a drink in the hotel bar while waiting for things to calm down. Jenkins agreed readily, already loosening his collar in the warm spring air. 2 whiskeys later, Jenkins was talking freely about his business ventures with Harlow, their banking interests in Kansas City, their plans for expansion into the Dakotas. Grant listened attentively, guiding the conversation with careful questions while maintaining his facade as a local businessman. "Mr. Harlow certainly landed on his feet here," Grant commented, signaling for another round. "Especially after that unpleasantness in Kansas City last year." Jenkins paused, his glass halfway to his lips. "Unpleasantness," Grant shrugged, the picture of casual indifference. "Just rumors, of course, something about a marshal investigating fraud." The change in Jenkins was immediate and telling. He set down his glass, suddenly wary. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No," Grant leaned forward. "That's strange because my brother knew all about it." "Marshal Robert Evans. The man Victor Harlow shot in the back 6 months ago." Jenkins's face drained of color. "You're Grant Evans, yes." Grant's voice remained conversational, but his eyes had gone hard. "And I believe you have documents in that satchel that could prove Harlow's guilt." Jenkins reached for the leather bag at his feet, but Grant was faster. "I wouldn't," he warned quietly. "This can go one of 2 ways, Jenkins. You can cooperate, give me the evidence I need to bring Harlow to justice legally, or you can join him in a cell. Your choice." The banker's shoulders slumped in defeat. "He'll kill me if he finds out I helped you." "He'll never know it came from you," Grant promised. "As far as Harlow will be concerned, I've been investigating on my own all along." Jenkins hesitated, then slowly opened the satchel and withdrew a folder. "These are copies of our transactions from Kansas City. Account numbers, dates, amounts. They show how Harlow diverted funds from the bank to private accounts." He swallowed hard. "There's also correspondence about your brother, Harlow. He planned it. It wasn't a spontaneous act." He knew the marshal was closing in. Grant took the folder, his hand steady despite the rage burning in his chest. "Why are you giving me this so easily?" Jenkins looked away. "Because Harlow plans to do the same thing here in Yankton, only this time I'd be implicated too. I came to warn him that authorities in Kansas City are still looking, but..." He shook his head. "I realized on the journey that there's no reasoning with him. He'd sacrifice me in a heartbeat to save himself." Grant studied the man, seeing the fear and regret in his eyes. "These documents, they'll stand up in court. They'll hang him," Jenkins said simply. "And me too, if it comes to that." Grant made a decision. "Get on the next train out of Yankton, go back to Kansas City, turn yourself in, tell them you're cooperating in the Harlow investigation. It might go easier on you." Relief washed over Jenkins's face. "And Harlow?" "Leave Harlow to me." As Jenkins hurried back to the station to catch the afternoon train east, Grant made his way to the sheriff's office. Not to see Donovan, who would be worse than useless, but to send a telegram to the federal marshal's office in Sioux Falls. With the evidence in his possession, he could now request official intervention. The response came swiftly: a U.S. Marshal would arrive on tomorrow's morning train with a warrant for Harlow's arrest. Grant's next stop was the telegraph office, where Ruby looked up from her desk with anxious eyes. The office was empty except for her, Mr. Hayes having stepped out on an errand. "Did it work?" she asked in a hushed voice. Grant held up the folder. "Better than I could have hoped. Jenkins gave me everything we need. A federal marshal is coming tomorrow to arrest Harlow. Ruby's face lit with relief and joy. It's over then, almost. Grant's expression sobered. Harlow won't go quietly. And when he realizes I'm behind this. He took her hand across the counter. Ruby, I want you to stay at Mrs. Patterson's tonight. Don't go anywhere alone. She squeezed his fingers. What will you do? Keep watch. Make sure Harlow doesn't try to run before the marshal arrives. He hesitated, then added, after it's done, after Harlow is arrested, I'll be leaving Yankton. Ruby felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. Leaving? Grant's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Unless I have a reason to stay. Before Ruby could respond, the office door opened and Mr. Hayes returned. Grant released her hand and stepped back. Thank you for the information, Miss Keating, he said formally. Good day. As he left, Ruby fought the urge to call him back, a reason to stay. The words echoed in her mind as she mechanically returned to her work. Did he mean what she thought he meant? And if so, what would she say when the time came? Night fell over Yankton, bringing with it a tense silence. Grant took up position across from the bank, watching from the shadows as Harlow worked late, clearly unsettled by Jenkins's failure to appear as planned. Occasionally, Sheriff Donovan would pass by, checking the doors of businesses already closed for the night. Each time, Grant shrank deeper into the darkness, knowing that confrontation now would only complicate matters. Around midnight, Harlow finally emerged from the bank, locking the door behind him. Instead of heading toward his home on the prosperous north side of town, he turned south, walking briskly toward the railroad station. Grant followed, keeping a careful distance. His suspicions were confirmed when he saw Harlow approach the station master's small house behind the depot. Money changed hands and words were exchanged that Grant couldn't hear, but the meaning was clear enough. Harlow was arranging for a late-night departure. As Harlow returned toward the main street, Grant stepped into his path. Going somewhere, Harlow. The banker froze, his hand instinctively moving toward his coat pocket. Who are you? Grant Evans, Robert Evans's brother. Recognition and fear flashed across Harlow's face, quickly replaced by calculation. I don't know any Robert Evans. You shot him in the back 6 months ago in Kansas City, Grant said, his voice deadly quiet. After he discovered you'd embezzled nearly $50,000 from your bank. Harlow's expression hardened. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Grant gestured vaguely toward the bank. Your partner Jenkins was very cooperative, provided all sorts of interesting documents. Jenkins, Harlow spat. That coward would sell his own mother to save his skin. He's smarter than you give him credit for, Grant replied. Smart enough to know when it's time to cooperate with the law. Harlow's hand moved again toward his pocket. There's no law in Yankton except what I say it is. I own Donovan. I own this town. Not anymore, Grant said. A federal marshal will be here on the morning train with a warrant for your arrest. For a moment, Harlow seemed to deflate. Then, with surprising speed, he drew a derringer from his pocket and fired. Grant had been expecting the move. He dove to the side, the bullet whistling past his ear as he drew his own revolver. Before he could fire, Harlow was running, disappearing down an alley between the feed store and the barbershop. Grant pursued, his longer legs quickly closing the distance. He rounded the corner in time to see Harlow sprint across the small bridge that led to the poorer section of town where Mrs. Patterson's boarding house stood, Ruby. The realization hit Grant like a physical blow. Harlow wasn't just running, he was heading directly for the one person Grant cared about most in Yankton. He redoubled his pace, fear lending him speed. Ahead, he could see Harlow approaching the boarding house, his intent clear as he bounded up the steps to the front porch. Harlow, Grant shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet night. It's me you want, the banker turned, his face twisted with hatred. You've taken everything from me, Evans. Now I'll take something from you. He raised the derringer toward the house just as the front door opened. Ruby stood in the doorway, a lamp in her hand, her eyes widening at the scene before her. Get down, Grant yelled, raising his revolver. Ruby dropped to the floor as 2 shots rang out simultaneously, Harlow's derringer and Grant's Colt. In the sudden silence that followed, Grant raced up the steps, terrified of what he might find. Ruby was pushing herself up from the porch floor, shaken but unhurt. Harlow lay crumpled against the railing, Grant's bullet having found its mark in his chest. The banker's eyes were open but unseeing, his final expression one of surprise. Grant helped Ruby to her feet, his hands trembling as they checked her for injuries. "Are you all right? Did he hit you?" "No," she assured him, her voice remarkably steady. "I'm fine. I heard shouting and came to see." She looked at Harlow's body, then back at Grant. "It's over, isn't it? Really over?" Before he could answer, Sheriff Donovan appeared at the bottom of the steps, his gun drawn. "Drop your weapon, Evans." Grant kept his revolver pointed downward but didn't relinquish it. "Harlow tried to kill Miss Keating. It was self-defense." "A likely story," Donovan snarled, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes as he took in the scene. "You're under arrest for murder." "No, he isn't." Mrs. Patterson's firm voice came from behind Ruby. The widow stood in the doorway, a shotgun in her hands. "I saw the whole thing, Sheriff. Mr. Evans is telling the truth. Harlow came here with murder in his eyes." Other neighbors were emerging from their homes now, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Mr. Hayes, who lived just 2 doors down. "Sheriff," the telegraph operator called, "there's a federal marshal arriving on tomorrow's train to arrest Harlow for crimes in Kansas City." "I received the telegram myself this afternoon." Donovan looked from Hayes to Mrs. Patterson, to the growing crowd of witnesses, and finally to Grant and Ruby. Slowly, reluctantly, he lowered his weapon. "I'll need statements from all of you," he muttered, his authority clearly diminished in the eyes of the townspeople. As the sheriff organized the removal of Harlow's body and took preliminary statements from witnesses, Grant led Ruby to a quiet corner of the porch. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant for you to be in danger." Ruby shook her head. "It wasn't your fault, and I'm not sorry, not for any of it." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "You said you'd be leaving Yankton after Harlow was dealt with, unless you had a reason to stay." Grant held her gaze, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the night's violence. "Yes. Would I be reason enough?" she asked softly. Instead of answering with words, Grant cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her. Ruby responded immediately, her arms encircling his waist as she returned the kiss with a fervor that matched his own. When they finally parted, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "More than enough reason," he whispered. "If you'll have me." Ruby smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "I think I've been yours since that first night, when you said I was running to you." The federal marshal arrived as scheduled the next morning, disappointed to find his quarry already deceased, but satisfied with the evidence Grant provided of Harlow's crimes. Sheriff Donovan, his primary protector gone, found himself facing increasing scrutiny from the townspeople he had long intimidated. Within a month, the town council would vote to replace him. Grant and Ruby were married in Mrs. Patterson's garden that summer, with Mr. Hayes giving the bride away and the widow herself beaming approval from the front row of assembled guests. The telegraph office became theirs to run together when Hayes decided to retire to Sioux Falls that fall. As for the people who had laughed when Ruby tried to run that night so many months ago, they were silenced now, watching with grudging respect as the former barmaid and the gunslinger built a life together in Yankton. 2 years later, as Ruby cradled their newborn son in her arms, Grant would remind her of that first night. "They laughed when you tried to run," he said, stroking their child's dark hair. "But I knew even then." "Knew what?" Ruby asked, smiling up at her husband. Grant leaned down to kiss her gently. "That you weren't running away, you were running to me." And as their son yawned and settled more comfortably in his mother's arms, both Ruby and Grant knew they had found in each other the home they had each been seeking all along.